viticulture on Friday. We have always enjoyed a partnership with the New York Wine and Grape Foundation, but this year they have brought it to a whole new level. I feel like I have been given a professional gift, and hopefully you get to all share that gift today, because they have jumped in with both feet to help reinvigorate the planning for the business day for BEV New York. And so I think we're all going to benefit from their hard work today. So I need to thank the foundation profusely for all of their help, especially Val Ross, Julie Hosbach, who are I think pivotal in this planning, and of course everybody at the foundation is always a great partner with Cornell and has been over the years, and we are so grateful for all their support. So with that, I would like to thank also our key sponsors today. We have many sponsors today, but particularly American National Insurance, who you'll hear from shortly, and Waterloo Container. We are excited to have all these great partnerships. We are excited to have you all here today. We hope to have a very productive and just thought-provoking day. And we know that you're not going to rather be outside. So with that in mind, we'd like to get that started. And we'll invite the Executive Director of the Wine and Grape Foundation, Sam Filler, up to continue our introductions. Welcome, Sam.
Well, good morning. Thank you for being here. We're really excited to be partnered with Cornell on BEV New York this year. I always admire the fantastic work that Chris, Hans, and Ann and Catherine and all the rest of the team do to put this on. It's a tremendous undertaking, and I really want to compliment them for their hard work. We were excited to be part of this revitalized business day, and a lot of thanks to the BEV New York Advisory Committee that I think did a survey and collected a lot of information from you all about topics that you were interested in and wanted to hear about. So the workshops that you see today reflect what you've asked for and what you're interested in. So thank you for all that feedback. And we couldn't do this without our conference sponsor, or I guess I'll start first with our business support for Bond, Chonick & King, who's our keynote speaker sponsor for today, and they're participating in the first panel. And then also want to recognize American National Insurance Farm Family as our business day sponsor, and they're our first ever sponsoring partner for the foundation. So it's exciting to work with them and have them here today too. So I'm excited to introduce Greg DeMario, who's got a few words.
Good morning. I just wanted to tell you guys how excited we are, American National. You may also know us as Farm Family. We've kind of been rebranding into the full American National name. So if you knew us as Farm Family, we are still the same company. But I want to tell you how excited we are to be sponsor today and to be a partner sponsorship with all of you. American National, so we do all of your business insurance. We would handle everything from start to finish, from growing to final production. We can handle all that stuff. We also handle a lot of business succession and covering all of your, hard blood, sweat, and tear work. So I just wanted to introduce, actually, I'm going to read this. We're excited and proud to bring you the panel presentation summarizing the key points from the most recent State of the Wine Industry Report from Silicon Valley Bank's Wine Division. Today, you will hear directly from our seasoned panel of professionals just how they think New York wineries can adapt to the market challenges and seize the opportunities. I'm pleased to introduce today's moderator, Charlie Sullivan from Bond, Chonick & King.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm so glad to be here, and thank you to Cornell, and thank you for the New York Wine and Grape Foundation for involving me and for putting this presentation on today. I think I'd like to invite the panelists to come up and join me right now, because we might as well jump right into the panel. And when everyone's here, I'll make some introductions. Okay, everyone has assumed their spots. So let me start by introducing Sam Filler, who is the Executive Director of the New York Wine and Grape Foundation. I'm sure that Sam probably doesn't need to be introduced to most people in the room. But Sam was just named in October 2019 as one of the Wine Enthusiast Top 40 Under 40 tastemakers. Since he took the foundation's reins in 2017, Sam has led a focused, driven team that promotes New York wines, which the organization says accounts for nearly $14 billion of economic impact for the state of New York. Overseeing marketing, event, research, and other educational campaigns to position New York's 7 major wine regions as a premier cool climate producers, he's rallied the foundation's many members behind a common voice to ensure that New York wines can be found, enjoyed, and understood in the worldwide stage. So thank you, Sam, for being part of our panel. I'd also like to introduce immediately to Sam's left, Richie Petrina. Richie is a principal of Ithaca Wine Ventures, which was recently founded in June of 2019. Richie's a native of Ithaca and a proud ambassador of the Finger Lakes wine region. He's a graduate of the Hotel School at Cornell and has remained actively involved with its global alumni and local community by mentoring students, serving as an executive in residence, and guest lecturing frequently. His industry experience is comprised of multiple fields within beverage alcohol, including business intelligence, wholesale sales and marketing, sales planning and finance, luxury marketing, strategic business development, and direct consumer marketing. To Kevin's left is Ali Tuthill. Ali has headed up had headed up Wolfer's marketing department for 2 years before leaving to manage Hounds Tree Wine and Sherwood House Vineyards in Jamesport. A Greenport resident and a former executive director of the Long Island Wine Council, Ali is excited to return to North Fork. Anyone who knows Ali knows that she has a very deep passion for the region of Eastern Long Island and the people of the agricultural community, not just wine. To Ali's left is, pardon me here, I've got missing a couple of resources. It's Kevin Martin. Kevin has had a lifelong interest in the Lake Erie grape region, so he's a little bit further to the west of here. While he didn't know it at the time, growing up in a vineyard was providing invaluable future job experience. He did not realize initially his professional interest would lead to a career related to his childhood experiences. With a Juris Doctor and a graduate degree in public administration, his work now focuses on business and financial planning. He also provides benchmarking to analyze the costs and benefits of evolving production practices. Technology, including canopy sensors, is a current hot topic facilitating an evolution in management strategies going forward. So as you can see, we've got a very diverse panel with, I think, a good spectrum of interests and experience to address the issue before us today, which is the state of the wine industry. I thought we would lead off by Sam, if you could please address the Silicon Valley Bank report dealing with the state of the wine industry at this point. That will really serve as sort of the kickoff point for our discussion about how that relates to New York specifically. So Sam.
So we thought we would review the 7 headwinds and 7 tailwinds that the report discusses. And not sure if all of you have had a chance to review it, but thought it would be helpful just to review those points. I would highly recommend after this panel that you take the time to flip through the report because it's generally considered the benchmark snapshot for the wine industry on an annual basis. Definitely is more slanted towards the California industry since they're about 90% of the wine production in the United States. However, I think it covers a lot of important market trends, consumer trends, and they have a wonderful set of 2 videos that you can watch which is what inspired this panel, was Rob McMillan organized a panel conversation with experts from the California industry to discuss the report and go in more detail. So hopefully we emulate and achieve what they did in those videos. So many of these are probably not a surprise to many of you. The first point is baby boomers are starting to retire. Their consumption is changing. They're moving to fixed incomes, yet they still represent 70% of the discretionary income in the United States. So the following generations have not taken their place in terms of the primary consumers in the United States. So because their consumption is declining, this is why we're seeing a declining consumption in the United States. It was the first time in 25 years that there was no growth in wine consumption. The second thing is there's, as you're probably familiar in your own lives, a greater consciousness on health. And so consumers are scrutinizing what they're eating and the calories. And that's there was big discussion in the panel conversations about, hard seltzer coming in and being the dominant beverage that many folks drunk last summer because it's 100 calories. There's not a lot of added ingredients to it. So whether that's a good thing or not, just our society is more focused on health and those impacts. And then this is definitely more of a California issue, but there was an oversupply of grapes, and they're predicting that they need to remove somewhere between 30 and 40,000 acres of vines to achieve equilibrium again. And I think we have somewhere between that and New York State planted. So it's always shocking to me where I went to the wine symposium that they have that's organized by the California Wine Grape Association. And 5 years ago, they were talking about how they turn over 10% of their vineyards in California, and they're planning to plant more. So it's sort of interesting to see now things are swinging back in the other way. Wine imports and substitutes are increasing and more competitive with wine. And I think that just goes back to the hard seltzer point. They also noted a lag in innovation with DTC strategies. So, innovating outside of your tasting room and your wine club, that there's other ways to reach consumers. And I think also with growing e-commerce in our society, that's an opportunity that, we need to take advantage of. And then again, since our wine consumers profile is changing and it's becoming younger, our marketing tactics need to change and address their concerns. So just to go back to the wine and health, they had a really good conversation on the panel that SVP organized, where they talked about, well, why do we keep serving in 5 ounces? Why don't we serve the appropriate, 3 ounces? So we can say, well, that's 100-calorie serving of wine. So there's, room for us to kind of address what the consumer wants. And then last, which I think we're all familiar with, is just labor availability is very tight, and it's hard to find qualified workers. It's hard to find workers for the vineyard. So that's, I think, just a national issue for agriculture. So let's talk about the good points is, Gen Xers and baby boomers are still reliable wine consumers. They're dedicated drinkers. They're very well educated about wine. So they'll continue to be a group that we can market and sell to. Even though millennials are not drinking wine in as much quantity as baby boomers, this is an opportunity to really educate a new group of consumers, reach them, and get their interest going in wine. There's, I guess oversupply is a blessing and a curse. So it's a good thing for consumers because the higher quality wine is moving down in price point as California looks to move that wine. And that, I think, this is probably a good point for us, is Oregon and Washington continue to see strong sales and strong interest. And so we're a similarly sized industry to Oregon, and that should be a good note for us. And again, producers with long established brands continue to do well in the market. And that is, I think, coupled with the premiumization trend it's not accelerating anymore, but consumers are still preferring to buy up and buy better quality. And then I think they also see opportunities in DTC. So there are your 7 tailwinds. One thing I did want to point out, I think this is important for us to see, is that if you see on the far end of this graph, it's Virginia. And last year in the 2018 report, it was New York. And I didn't go back and look at all the previous reports, but to me, this is a little shocking because Virginia is half our size, and we should be part of the conversation. We are the #3 wine producer in the United States, and for us not to be included in this report is a shame and disappointing. And I don't know why that happened, but I certainly intend to work with Rob McMillan and ensure that we're covered in this report. I didn't include the slide about vineyard acreage, but Virginia is included in that part of the report about what's planted and what are the changes. And we tried to do a vineyard survey this year, and we got about a 60% response rate. So we need to have up-to-date information to be able to participate in studies like these and be included in the national conversation. So I'll end with that, and I'll turn it back over to Charlie.
Thank you, Sam. That really set the stage for our discussion. Let me talk a little bit about the format for this panel presentation this morning. We talked about it ahead of time, and what the panelists landed upon was sort of a question and answer format. So we have a series of questions which are tailored to the 7 headwinds and 7 tailwinds with a specific focus on New York. We're going to go through a series of questions which are posed to the panelists, and then at the end, we're going to reserve 10 to 15 minutes for questions for the panelists. So any questions or thoughts about that format before we begin? Okay. So let's first focus on the challenges that the industry faces. The question that I have for the panelists, and I'm going to turn it to Kevin first, is how do the 7 headwinds that are noted in the State of the Industry report from Silicon Valley Bank align or not align, as you see it, with what you were seeing in your role working with the New York wine industry?
So I think the point that I took away from this is that, for the most part, on a macro level, we are seeing some alignment in the Lake Erie region because we participate quite a bit in the bulk market and distributing to wineries in Virginia and all over the place. I think they did a good job of trying to anticipate a little bit louder. I think they did a good job of trying to explain the trends that they're seeing. It's a little difficult to do that until we get a little bit deeper into these patterns. But that being said, I think, unless you're Gallo or, one of the top 10 wineries in the United States, what you're facing in your individual winery might look a whole lot different than these macro trends. It could be something like, an undersupply of grapes for you. It could be something totally different. And I think the one point I want to make is that you try to look at what your challenges are and just pay attention to these macro trends and try to anticipate how they might affect you. If you're marketing directly to millennials and that's 50% of your market share, you're not going to look anything like some of these trends that they're talking about. Or if you're a 5,000 case winery that just sells to baby boomers in Buffalo, these trends are going to be a lot less important to you, but there's something to pay attention to. So I think that's how I took it in terms of how I would apply it if I was a winery owner in New York State.
Sam, if I may, there's one point that came out in the Silicon Valley report that I thought I might ask you your thoughts on, and that is one of the takeaways that I got from the report was that a focus on management practices and efficiencies is critical across any business model. I think that's probably true for New York as elsewhere. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that it goes to the point of we constantly have to be thinking about our business model and evolving it to meet the fact that our consumer interests are changing, the consumer audience is changing. And so, I know many of us do very well with sales through the tasting room, and tourism is really important for New York State. And, from the foundation's perspective, we've been looking to how do you develop these other e-commerce platforms that can provide maybe not your entire market, but places where you can interact with consumers who are buying in many different ways. So you have to always be conscious of that.
Okay. Let me turn the discussion a little bit to a generational topic, which I think
can I just add?
Absolutely.
So sorry. I just wanted to add one thing, which is, I agree that with any like major study, it's our job to synthesize the information and then make it applicable to our business, 100%. One key takeaway that I had, and I think we should all be aware of, especially as we dive into these other subjects, is we live in a time where everything changes very quickly with the consumer. So we talk a lot about millennials and why they aren't buying. Millennials change and they move at like lightning speed. And so whereas we did, maybe 10, 15 years ago, we were afforded the ability to kind of take information, sit on it, make some changes over the course of time. Now we're seeing with social media, access to information, like things flip and move so quickly. And so while I think that there are key learnings we can certainly take, and it takes time to make change, like don't get me wrong, I think that it behooves us all to really look at this and say, what are the major trends that we're facing? And they're not going away. And so they have to be addressed regardless of the size of business or where we are from, especially when it comes to the consumer, because a lot of the issues that are bubbling up from a headwind perspective is because we can't pull this younger demographic in to consume wine at the rate that we were hoping when they first entered in the stage as a potential buyer. So, so that would be like the only thing I'd add, which is 100%, we have to make sure that all this information is then taken and made relevant to your individual businesses. But there is a sense of urgency in some regard, just given how quickly everything's moving.
Well, Ali, I'm glad you brought that up on the generational issue. And Richie, I was wondering if maybe you could speak to that, because it seems to me that, again, thinking about the millennials, for example, it's both a headwind and a tailwind. Yeah. And I think that there's an interesting opportunity in New York.
How many times have we said millennials so far this morning?
Yeah.
So, I'm kind of new back to the area, but anecdotally, I'm in tasting rooms all the time, and I hear, the future snowbirds that are saying to you, ship to South Carolina or Florida or whatever, follow your customer, ask if they're just visiting, if they are on the older side who, like my folks who, would prefer not to be in Ithaca 12 months out of the year, learn where your customers are, ask questions, have postcards, have things that are not necessarily expensive to produce, but follow your customer and stay in touch with them. On the millennial side, or the younger side, whatever it is, I think people want to discover more, and I'm excited to listen to the panel later with Bruce. There's a sense people are seeking authenticity, and I really admire family-owned businesses and first generation, second, third. They're multi-generational families in the room, and I think it's really amazing that you have that sense of authenticity that really appeals to people who are now getting a lot of their marketing from Instagram, right? So if you can actually be the person to explain your story and what made you choose your passion and why you're doing this, I think that really appeals to people of any generation, but especially the younger generation who are now force-fed marketing stuff from companies far away from our New York State. So I think it's worth the focus on that.
Shifting gears to another one of the headwinds, which I think also can be characterized to a degree as a tailwind. Kevin, could you share with us your thoughts on the state of oversupply that we're experiencing?
So I think I alluded to this before, and I think in New York, I don't know that we necessarily see significant oversupply in the Finger Lakes or in Long Island, but when we highlight the native varieties that are, I'll say, exported outside of New York State, we certainly see that as a meaningful trend. One of the, I think, ways we got lucky is the wine market was still growing. We were utilizing Concords, and we'll continue forever to utilize Concords as wine. But they picked up some of the slack when the juice market was struggling. And that has pretty much reversed at this point. It's returned to its sort of average utilization rate, with more of that going back to juice and less of it going to wine. It's still, a really meaningful number, but that's, I think, an important trend to pay attention to locally. I think what I would probably say is particularly in that arena of hybrids and natives, if I were a winery, I would not overextend myself and leverage a whole lot of capital to expand at this time, unless I knew something about my individual market that was different than these trends. So I would probably make sure I knew what my market was and how it was behaving, who those consumers were, before I overexerted a lot of leverage in planting. I would think that the quality of juice that you can buy on the market, if these trends do hold, will probably be a little bit better than it usually is when things are in really short supply. I wouldn't necessarily speak to vinifera. I think in our region, and probably even in the Finger Lakes still, it's a small enough market that I don't think you can apply these trends to that vinifera production.
Ellie, is oversupply an issue on Long Island?
Well, we've had, I mean, we've had some strong years where we've made a lot of juice, and certainly still sitting on some of that. I think the oversupply issue, from my point of view, we can try to manage and predict what the supply will be, but we're in an industry where we could have 1 year where we're pulling in an enormous amount of juice, and another where we have, on Long Island in particular, hurricanes or some terrible thing, and we have, a really small vintage. So I think California is probably more suited in terms of like this being a huge issue. I do see oversupply as a consumer problem in my mind, where oversupply maybe wasn't an issue because we'd be able to rely on consumers to come and want the product. And now we're seeing, with kind of the bulk of the buying shifting towards this younger demographic, oversupply becomes an issue because the demand isn't there. And that's what's kind of challenging and scary. And so we want to keep making wine, we want to keep making innovation, but if we can't be sitting on inventory that people aren't buying. So when I look at oversupply, I keep pivoting back to, how are we addressing the consumer issue? How are you bringing new fans to our region and to the state so that we can address some of the oversupply issues with actually selling the wine?
And Richie, I don't know what your thoughts are, but is that kind of an opportunity?
Well, so I wanted to, this is not I wanted to ask for a show of hands of who's looking at or actually actively involved in non-traditional bottlings, like cans, for their wines. Okay. So it's like 25%, very anecdotal. Some are doing it already. I think, I think you have to, if you have the opportunity to test the waters for something that will not be a long-term innovation or experiment that could fail, I think it's worth looking at, following what the trends are. People are, want to look at fun things that they can hold that have bright colors, and that may be hybrids, may be slightly effervescent, and things that also come and go. There's this idea of a limited, if you only have so much of it, and once it's gone, it's gone. It actually gets people a little bit more excited to be a part of that, or things that can only be purchased at the winery door. So I think it's worth taking advantage of some of these trends, which may look difficult, but actually like using them as an advantage, because you're here, we're here. If you put yourself in the shoes of a producer from another country, especially, or from California, it's a lot more difficult for them to hire people, have people on the ground, talk to stores and restaurants, or even to consumers, and to create something in another country and then have it be brought to market here takes a lot of months. And the economies of scale are not worth doing unless you're going big. So I think it's worth experimenting with things that are not costly, that might be just interesting as a way to also keep your customers engaged for something that's fun, and keeps them coming back for something over time.
Let's turn to another one of the headwinds that was identified in the report, and that's negative health advertising and the impact of that upon demand. Do we see that as a real factor in New York? And I'll throw that up kind of in the air and see if any of the panelists want to touch upon that.
I think it's an industry. I don't think it's negative health per se. I think it's everybody is looking for. Everybody wants to know what goes into their products, right? We live in a time where, and this is being fueled hugely by the younger generation, I won't say millennial, by the way. I won't say it anymore. But people are demanding to know what's in their product, what's going in, with the process behind making it. They want things that are perceived as good for them. So we can make the argument whether hard seltzer is actually good for you or a health product. It's full of, like, I don't even know how you, it's not good for you, but the perception is there because they are brilliant marketers.
Moderation.
In moderation. But this consumer that is coming in with force is demanding accountability for everything, and they care about what goes into their bodies. And so there is this like health and wellness trend going on that nobody can ignore, not even just in this industry. It's touched every industry. With regards to beverage, though, moderation, the sober curious movement, these are all things that have taken hold and have exploded. And I think at the detriment of wine, because you've had spirits come in and they jumped all over it, and they jumped into on-premise, and they worked with key accounts in major cities to create like low APV or no alcohol cocktail menus, and they made it cool to not drink. But most people, what they do is they use that as a moderator, right? They still want to go out, they want to drink, they'll have a cocktail, maybe a non-alcoholic cocktail, and then another cocktail, and they feel like they're like helping themselves, right? Hard seltzer is the same thing. We haven't been entering into that dialogue. And I think that it's something that we absolutely have to do. And it's more complicated than health or not. It goes into sustainable farming and what you're putting, additives you're putting into your wines. And then ultimately, is it good or bad for you? How many calories are in your glass of wine? I think we can't play in that conversation. The conversation we should be having with our consumers is, hey, New York is a wine region that makes moderate alcohol wines. That's what we do. It's what we do best. There's a place for that at your table. You can share a bottle with friends, and it will not, put you over the edge after an evening. It's part of a moderated kind of evening. You can start with a cocktail, have a glass of our wines. It should be incorporated into the dialogue. And I think that there's a lot that we can say about our farming practices here, about the attention. I know on Long Island, for example, we have a sustainable wine growers union that is really spearheading sustainable farming in our region, making sure that dialogue is integrated into this, so consumers can feel confident that choosing a New York wine is choosing something that's benefiting them, the environment, social causes, et cetera. It's kind of like all baked into one. I think the health trend, it's hitting beverage. It's been around for a while, whether it's dieting or, fad, anything really. But I really do think that it's something that isn't going to go away. We have huge companies now playing in it with the hard seltzer category. I think you're going to see the spirits industry continue to double down on it. Beers coming in with no alcohol beer, low alcohol beer, watered down alcohol beer. So it's not going away. So we just have to find a way to really craft our message in accordance as an alternative or a supplement to it.
Richie, I'll call upon you here because it seems like it's becoming complex in terms of the messaging, the story to consumers. I mean, for years we've known that it's important for our consumers to have a story behind our wine, to understand, the producer, where the wine comes from. But now it seems we need to fold in the health benefits, as Ali observed, and the sustainability of our practices. How do we bring this message together?
So just to piggyback on what Ali so well executed and said, I think having been on the other side of trying to market wines from other parts of the world to folks here, you're always envious, I guess, of the grass is always greener. And it's not just that people want to know what's in their bottle, but I think just as importantly, if not more so, they want to know, how it got there. Like, what's the story behind of all the things that you could be doing, why are you making wine in New York State? And sharing that story and, being proud of the fact that this is a family project, and this is made on a real farm in a real part of this world that you can actually drive to if you wanted to. That's a luxury that other companies and other brands and wineries from other parts of the world just don't have. It's this very exotic thing to come from, Italy or France or Spain or all these amazing growing regions around the world. It's hard to find bad wine now from any part of the world. So, but they don't have what we have and what you have. So I think that's the part that that has worked well in my past is being able to share the story and share your story of why you're doing this. Who are you? Who are the real people behind this? And what motivates you, and what is the passion behind it? And like how many months it's aged in, and what kind of barrel becomes really like not even relevant for a lot of people, just because they're more passionate about learning that, and then they do become brand lovers for a long time. And that's the hope, I think, develop people like that we put so much effort into developing relationships with trade, with the sommelier or with the retailer, and they're super important. But a consumer that loves your wine might be much more important and will actually buy more wine and tell more of his or her friends and buy your wine for their friends and family than an account will. And yet we don't really put the same level of investment, focus, or love into those folks as much as we do for the trade. And I think that's, some people do, and I think, I would think that you're finding success in that. So
I think too, what you're saying as well, I think the storytelling has always been there, right? And now it's making it accessible. It's more accessible. And I think that's one of the things I think we get knocked on as a wine industry, is that despite best efforts, it's always seen as almost like standoffish to the millennial consumer, where craft beer and spirits are way more accessible to them in terms of like comfort level, understanding. The quality of spirits and craft beer have increased, so they feel like they're making a premium decision. It's up to us now to take our stories and really make them accessible to consumers and resonate with consumers. And to your point, the technical details of wine are so important for maybe the trade audience or a specific audience, but for the general consumer and for the younger consumer, we have to start to find a way to engage with dialogue that conveys the special attributes of our brands in a way that brings them in versus like kind of pushing them out. And that is through the people and the stories and the practices, and less so about the technicality behind the process.
Yeah, and I would just add, as it relates to the discussion about health, I think in a way it's good that this trend of health was based on hard seltzer, because it becomes very clear that it's really not about science. It's about a story. And it's also about helping your consumers regulate their consumption of alcohol. So package delivery, which we already mentioned, I think is a good strategy, but other ways that you can innovate your product line to be more sessionable. It's not that they don't want to drink 750 milliliters of wine. It's just that they want to be able to constantly drink that over a period. So they'll have those 100-calorie sparkling beverages, but they'll still have 7 of them.
Yeah, or 12,
which is
like it's ridiculous.
We listened to a podcast about it to help us prepare for this, and there's some laughter in the room. I don't think it's ridiculous at all. Like if I go to a brewery and I have 3 beers and I'm like, oh man, how am I going to get home? Like that's highly undesirable. And if I can keep up with the other people that are drinking in a social setting and not feel anything the next day, that's kind of desirable. So I think in a social setting, there's a desire for, and maybe it's unique to millennials, maybe it's not, but there's a desire to be constantly consuming something. That's part of the social aspect. And if you have a 15% wine, you can't, you need to take a break, and they don't want to. So if you can innovate your product lines to fit that mold a little bit more, I think it would help that.
If I can add one more point, sorry, it's just fascinating. I think I'm sure you've heard of the brand Seedlip from Diageo, the biggest drinks company. They, January is by far their biggest month of the year, right? Like dry January is not just a trend. I mean, it's legit. I don't know how many. I have a lot of friends that do that. Okay, maybe they go a little bit over in December, and that's a good way to kind of cleanse, but it's real. So if you're in the business of selling wine, what are you doing in January? Like send them recipes for what to cook and, with your wines once they start, but like actually celebrate that. Like don't not do anything for the month of January because people are actually not drinking, but help them get ready for the day after when they've been like saving up, and actually get them to stock up their cellar at home, so that they're not just, you know, you're part of the conversation, not just kind of riding that wave without them.
Let's turn to another topic that we haven't really given much coverage to yet, and that's labor. And that, of course, we're going to be touching upon that a little bit more this afternoon when my partner Hillary Morera does a breakout session. But I wanted to get the panelists' perspectives on labor considerations as a headwind in New York, and what challenges the industry faces, or what advantages we have because we're positioned here in New York with respect to labor. Does anyone want to start with that? Sam, do you have an observation on that?
I will acknowledge that I'm not in many of your positions where you're running a wine business and you have to find the labor and you have to keep them employed and keep them happy. But we spend a lot of time at the foundation working with wine trails and wine tourism, and every part of the state. All the wine trails are telling me, we got to solve this winter tourism issue. How do we get people to visit our regions? And the kind of catch to that is the other supporting hospitality aspects of the tourism industry. They're also in their off season. So they have challenges keeping their restaurants open. They have challenges filling their hotels. I mean, that's not to say it's impossible for us to like crack that nut, but even you'd think Long Island, 2 hours from New York City, they would still be vibrant January, February, March, but you go there during the week and you can't go to a fine dining restaurant. And, part of it has to do with the seasonality of the labor. And, again, like I'll say, I hear anecdotally just the challenges of finding labor for the vineyards, and there's a need to move towards mechanization. And so I think what is reassuring to me is that we do have, Finger Lakes Community College, we have the Cornell Hotel School, and so we're training good people. But I think, finding, at least from the tourism perspective, if we did some research behind this. We worked with Campbell Ewald that they'll be presenting later today about, well, what are the, what are the marketing messages that we can, talk to consumers, at least in the New York City market, to say, hey, right in your backyard, you have this vibrant wine industry in Long Island, Hudson Valley, the Finger Lakes, even out to Lake Erie. And so I think part of the challenge of people coming to visit in the winter months is, they just don't know how to find us. And so that's part of the story we need to tell. I know I kind of veered away from labor, but, it's kind of the chicken and the egg. It's, if the people are not coming, then there's not the money coming in to help support all those other supporting hospitality industries that are part of our wine tourism economy.
Richie, what about the labor piece?
So just again, not from a farming perspective, but I'm going to the Finger Lakes Community College dinner that was canceled because of the big snowstorm we had. I really would encourage you to, I do a lot of work with students. I would encourage you to hire an intern part-time to help with things like social media if you're not comfortable doing it. Hire someone for not a lot of money per hour. It's great for the resume, whether it's from FLCC or from Cornell or from any school that's near you. There are some really intelligent young folks who would love to be able to work a few hours a week with a brand and actually feel like they're doing something good, but also to get their skills going and add value in a real sense. And so sometimes the students don't know that you all exist, and it takes one or the other to kind of establish that relationship. But with the folks from Cornell or whoever, get involved and don't be afraid to test someone out for a little bit, even if it's a few hours a week. It's not very costly, and it might take some of that bandwidth off of your plate to do other things that you're more comfortable doing.
We probably should also acknowledge our host, RIT. This is part of their hospitality program. So they also have very talented alumni and students that you should think about as well.
Okay. Kevin?
So I guess I would just add that I think that networking is really important, because if you are in a position of owning a winery and you're struggling to find help, you do actually have pretty decent jobs to offer. And to the extent that you need extra help in the summer, I think that's probably one of the most valuable pools of labor you can get to. There is a trend in the US toward H-1B visas for seasonal help. It's probably not where you want to go unless you're a large winery, but for seasonal help in other industries, that's what they've had to rely on as other visas have dried up. Certainly on the vineyard side, it's a problem. It's not just going to cost more, but the supply itself is going to be depleted if current trends hold. So we will see mechanization replace because price alone isn't going to fix the problem. Short-term solution might be the H2A program, it might not be. We're not there yet in terms of price in the Lake Erie region. We probably are in the Finger Lakes, but there's a lot of headaches associated with programs like that. So those jobs aren't particularly good jobs. You're not going to get college students to do most of those jobs. You know, there might be some interest here and there in the summer, but the cost will be relatively high and the productivity will be relatively low. I speak from experience. I grew up on a vineyard. I didn't do it. So I think there are some opportunities as a winery that you don't have if you're operating a vineyard as well. That there are going to be struggles unique in both arenas. And I would just say that use those opportunities that you have, and you might have some success in the winery.
Allie, do you have anything to add about your experience on that?
Yeah, I think I can't speak to vineyard labor, although I agree that it's challenging given the current climate and we worry about it every day. I just want to also point out that a lot of the businesses here are small, family owned and operated. So oftentimes there isn't an opportunity to scale staff or to bring on additional staff or to pay people salaries that they're looking for, especially in the New York area, which is difficult. I think one of the key takeaways, and you brought it up when we first started, is, you know, it used to be competitive. It's like, okay, we just got to get our wine to the consumer. Now to be competitive in this market, it's about how do we grow and evolve our business to be as efficient as possible, so that we're making products in the right amounts, that we're getting it to market in the correct way, that we're marketing it appropriately, because it's all about scalability, right? And to do that, you need to invest in people and team, and not just bodies, but the right people and the right team, which requires really thinking about your business and your business needs, and then recruiting the right people, and then having a succession plan for them or a career plan for them, so you retain that talent and you're not wasting money just bringing people in the door that are just leaving for better opportunities somewhere else. So I think it's more nuanced than do we have a labor problem or not. It's, you know, where's the state of our industry right now? Are we growing? Absolutely. Is there opportunity? 100%. And now it's okay, we have to start investing in the people to make us get to the next level, which requires support from our local education systems. It requires proper career training, growth, mentorship, internships. That's like a huge nut to crack, but it's something that I think is vitally important to the success of every business in here and the region on a whole, because there is strong interest in coming to New York to be in the New York wine industry. And I see it all the time on Long Island in particular, where people are looking for professional jobs, cellar jobs, chemistry, like every part of the wine industry, but we don't have the pipeline to keep them. And so we might get someone for a year or two, and then they leave and they go to California or Oregon or Washington or somewhere else. And so we need to find a way as a state to really double down and retain talent. And that's my big issue.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, this conversation has been great, because I think it's shown how many of the headwinds are also tailwinds, depending upon how we look at it in New York, and there are opportunities. There are a few tailwinds, though, that were identified in the SVP report that I want to make sure that we touch upon. And that is developing strategies and tactics around DTC. Richie, could you please address that a little bit, and the whole, what are some of the key components of developing a sustainable direct-to-consumer?
So I'm going to plug my, just because I put these slides on my site for you. So this is not public, but it's ithacawineventures.com spelled out /BEV NY. I used to do this for a very large French company, which again did not enjoy the ability to actually sell direct to consumers here. And yet we tried and we did it in very profitable ways at a very high price point, because there's this, we identified folks that were really keen on discovering the brands, creating a relationship with the brands, and creating a relationship with the folks behind the brands. And you know, as I would translate that to doing it from this perspective, I think you have a really amazing opportunity, and that we in this area have a really amazing opportunity to, again, to share that story, to be authentic. The authenticity is, I think, the most important kind of value that consumers really seek. And I think by not differentiating how you talk to the consumer, this idea of omni-channel, whether you talk to them in your tasting room, or whether you talk to them at a dinner, or whether you talk to them online through your wine club if you have one, and if you don't, there are other ways of staying in touch. And I would just urge you to kind of collect that data, not in a creepy Facebook, you know, way, but you know, if you're doing a dinner somewhere, before you organize a dinner, whether it's with a restaurant, you should know everyone who's coming. Like, they should give you the names of those people. If you just do the dinner, it's because the restaurant is buying the wine and it's a nice event, and you walk away and you never stay in touch with those folks again, that's a really missed opportunity. And you know, I on my little my 3 points are: know your clients, be relevant to your clients in all that you do with them, and surprise and delight them to keep them engaged over time. And I just feel that you have such a big opportunity being here and actually being able to touch the client directly, even if it's just one time, even if it's like the parents of the kids that are graduating, or the students that probably won't be back for 5 years until their reunion, or the grandparents that are living here and then moving out. You have an opportunity to create that relationship and then stay in touch with them and continue selling to them regardless of where they are, most places. So I really want to emphasize that idea of creating that authentic relationship with them and staying in touch in however of a way you can do that. You don't need to invest in, I mean, I know there's a panel later about, you know, a lot of these different things. You don't need to spend a lot of money to do this. There are tools out there that you can invest behind, but you don't need to having a really decent Excel spreadsheet that is that has good data in it, that has you know, the names and the email addresses and a few interests. Like, ask your guests, do they have a dog if you're a dog lover? Because maybe you'll have some communication out about your dog. And I mean, I'm just making that up, but people want to have a relationship, understand what you're all about. And, you know, it's really difficult as a brand to do that. And it's much easier as a person to do that. So again, I just would invite you to try to be authentic in all that you do and not be shy about it, because that's what people are really craving.
Hallie, I know you have thoughts on DTC as well, which you've shared some of already.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's I think one of my key takeaways from the study this year was that DTC was more important than ever, but it's also more complicated than ever. And so, you know, it's like, how are we innovating at point of sale for the consumer to get them excited? And I keep going back to what the consumer wants, and you've been great about kind of reinforcing that. And the consumer wants excitement, experience, choices, and they don't really want to work hard for it, right? Like, we live in this age where, like, most people just read a headline, they think they know the news, they're good. Like, you know, we have to give it to them where they're looking for it, right? And I think that really kind of thinking about how we're managing that at the tasting room level is really important. How we're doing it through Wine Club is really important, and being open to, like, other ways of presenting wine. You know, I mentioned what we're doing with Houndstree is, instead of building our tasting room in Long Island, our tasting room is now in Brooklyn. It's where our consumer is. It's an urban establishment. It's where our consumer is. And instead of just featuring our wines, we will feature wines from all over New York State, about 150 by the glass. And the goal for that is to give consumers options around New York State wines within the funnel of Houndstree brand, because it's our belief that if we can sell New York, then it makes consumers understand our brand even better. I mean, it's a risk, but it's, I think, one that will pay off greatly. But with that, it's talking to consumers about the different styles of wine, why that should be a part of it. We're also going to have craft beer and spirits there as well to show how wine can integrate into an evening or a pairing or, an experience. That's what consumers are looking for. They want answers. They want to know how to use your product, how to taste it, how to enjoy it, all within a comfortable setting. So I think that we have the benefit of starting this project now, but I think if I even back up, it's, how do we make our tasting rooms exciting? Brand partnerships are huge and very, very impactful. And I think if we look out in our community and say, hey, who are people really gravitating towards right now? It may not be within wine. It may be within food or design or art. Partner with them. They have an audience that is pulling interest, and create an on-site experience that's equal parts Instagrammable, shareable, but also brings new people in your door that may not have been there in the first place to taste and enjoy your wines. Because I bet you once they see them, taste them, enjoy them, get to hear your experience, they walk out the door with a couple bottles and become lifelong customers. So it's really, it can't just be, hey, please buy my wine through my wine club. It has to be interesting and engaging. And I think that's, for me, DTC has to be a constant optimization. We can't rely on the tactics of the past because they're not resonating with this younger consumer. And I think looking outside of our industry for inspiration is something that I do a lot, where I'm looking at what the spirits industry has done, and they've crushed DTC. They've crushed the industry because they realize the importance of influence and aspiration for this consumer. And they've gone into key on-premise accounts in key cities, have partnered with cool bartenders, and have made the cocktail movement super, super cool. Now, does that mean that someone in Iowa is going to come to New York City and go to that bar? Maybe not, but they'll replicate that cocktail at home. So I think that, and they're purchasing that brand because they saw it through their networks. And so I think we have to be more creative about bringing other people in, serving our product through other channels, but also then reinforcing all of the benefits of New York wine, which is, hey, this is high quality, this is amazing, this is a region on the up and up, moderate alcohol, perfect for what you're looking for, food friendly, consumable across all occasions. You like rosé, you like Riesling, you like Syrah, you like we have everything. Now, now come to our tasting room. So that's my thing.
Can I add just a quick two very tactical things that have worked well for me in the past? I'm sure you've gotten asked to donate wine for charity auctions every day, right? Mm-hmm. Just sure, let's just give it away all the time. And I'm sorry if you're in the room and actually are asking for a charity auction. So, but what I stopped doing years ago and instead offered is a tasting experience in your home. It's your time or someone on your team's time. But if someone's going to pay a few $100s or a few $1,000s, you get to go to their home and bring the tasting experience and tell your story, taste the wine with them in their own home with their friends. It's like a tasting experience for you and 11 of your friends. It costs you a few bottles of wine and a couple of hours of your time. And you will have those customers for life, not just the people that actually spent money who are sharing telling you they're interested in wine, but they're bringing their friends and family. So that's one really simple thing that anyone can do. Instead of giving a case of wine that you'll never see or know who it went to, because whoever's asking you doesn't even follow up with that. And the second thing is offer tastings in people's homes. You have customers who probably come on a regular basis and buy wines from you. Say, hey, next time, can we do this in your home with your friends? You can actually sell that by getting them to pay for the wines that you're opening. Or if you want to do a nice thing for them, say, we'll bring some wines that maybe you haven't tried yet. Invite your friends, have glassware. You don't need to do food. Maybe recommend a few things for them to prepare. And it is one of those things wow, you would actually do that. And again, if you have the time or if you have someone on your team that is able to do that, I really would encourage you to do that and take the tasting room experience away from just the tasting room, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter where people discover that. They again, want to know who you are.
I want to reserve enough time at the end for questions from the audience to the panelists, but there's one sort of overarching question that I want to pose specifically to Kevin and to Sam, and then to the extent Richie and Allie have input on it, I'd like them to add as well. But so Kevin, I'll start with you. What is the most important thing that a New York winery should do to better adapt their business models to take advantage of the tailwinds we've been talking about?
So again, I go back to the idea that you really need to understand what your brand is and who your consumers are. You know, if millennials are important to you, and they certainly should be if your plan is to do like a next generation winery. If this winery is going to be around for the next 30 years, millennials need to be important at some point. It's just has to be. So I would say kind of the most important thing I would do is to cultivate a genuine and established brand that is either true to you specifically or true to something that you can at least sell as sort of a natural fit for something beyond just wine. So I think wineries all have a good story in that it's a natural product that you grow the grapes behind the winery, you make the wine, and it's there. It's been done that way for thousands of years, but that's not unique to you. So cultivating a unique brand that it appears genuine to a next generation and can be easily accessible through experiences. I think there's a common misconception that millennials are broke and don't spend money. They just spend money on different things. So they don't go to a liquor store and spend $200 on a bottle of wine, but they do spend a lot of money on experiences and things that they view as genuine relationships with brands.
Sam, do you have thoughts?
I would recommend, if you haven't reviewed it yet and you are a member of the Wine and Grape Foundation, is we did this project last year with Campbell Ewald, and it's called the Wine Marketing Tourism Toolkit. And we did very extensive consumer research on consumers that are within a 5-hour drivable distance from New York State. And we discovered that we are the preferred wine destination for those consumers over California and other parts of the world. And so I mean, we have a competitive advantage because we're so close to New York City, but we're close to Cleveland, we're close to Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, parts of Connecticut. We're in a really great sweet spot. So what I would say about the toolkit is if you haven't taken the time to really define your audience as Kevin is recommending, we've broken it down into 3 core groups: millennials, Gen X women, and baby boomers, and there's specific tactics and strategies that are part of that toolkit that you can experiment with and play with. And, I know it's kind of leaning more on wine tourism, but I think that's still going to remain an advantage for us because we are in a very beautiful part of the world. You have a really great story to tell because 80% of the wineries in the state are farm wineries. So to me, again, that means it's generally family owned and operated. When we went up to Toronto to meet with the LCBO, which is the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, we met with the CEO, George Saleas, and one of his first questions that he put to us is, what is the level of investment into your wine region? Which he was asking, well, who are the big guys that are coming in and, investing in vineyards or investing in buying wineries? And I said, well, that's not really happening to a large extent as it does in California, which I think he was asking because somehow that's like a marker of success or a marker of health of our industry. I said, the wineries that are up for sale are being bought by other wineries within our region. That it's happened in the Finger Lakes, happens in Long Island. I think that's just a testament again to the family-oriented, small production industry that we have, and I think that's to our advantage because we can continue to tell a personal story about our wines and what makes them unique and what makes the particular terroir of your own winery special, and makes the Cabernet Franc from the Hudson Valley is going to taste a lot different from the Cabernet Franc from the Finger Lakes, and then even from lake to lake. So I would really encourage you to review that toolkit because the consumer research is still very fresh, and it has some, I think, really helpful tips in there to get you thinking about other things you can start implementing.
Thank you. So I want to spend a couple minutes now for questions. So we've got about 5 or 10 minutes now at the end for a few questions. Are there questions? And what I'll do for questions, I'll just be rude if you don't mind and point to you. And then if you have a question for a particular panelist, go ahead and direct it to the panelist, or if it's to the panel generally, I think we'll just field it sort of as they come. So you, sir, in the second row.
Yes, one of the things to the panel in general, is with an excess 30,000 acres of production coming out of California. What is the effect of that often very good wine coming into our retail stores in Buffalo, Rochester, New York, you name it, at relatively low prices or highly promoted? Could you repeat the question so we know it?
I will do my best. So the question is, with the oversupply in regions like California, where there's very good quality wine that's available to our consumers here in New York, what's the direct impact on our industry here? Richie, do you have some thoughts?
So I think what that leads to is private labels, and a winery that already has an existing brand will not want to dilute its equity by selling something under their regular. They'll come up with a secondary label or a private label that a retailer or a restaurant group will do. And again, it goes back to this idea of you can come up with a brand tomorrow, right? You just made it up, and you can buy juice for not a lot of money. You won't be able to compete on price, but you'll be able to compete on the authenticity of where your wine comes from and who you are behind it. So I think that's something that you can never just kind of create from thin air, but no doubt that private label juice is going to be a factor, and you have to protect against it by being able to offer something that those guys don't have, which is your story. I mean, that brand will never be able to come to a Rochester restaurant and do a wine dinner. They don't even exist, right? It's just something that was made up as a marketing thing. So that's something that you have that they don't, and I would fight for that and really highlight that.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
My name is Ken Warner, and I do marketing for a local winery up on the lake. I haven't said millennial yet today. It's almost 10 o'clock, so I would like to just make a comment about that. Through a bizarre set of circumstances, I know a lot of millennials. And one of the things that I'm trying to deal with is, if we're driving along in a car and it's lunchtime, they don't say, let's go find a winery. They say, let's go find a brewery. And they don't particularly mind that brewery beer is 12% alcohol. They don't say, oh, I don't want to drink that because that's, let's have a glass of wine. It's only 7%. I just think that breweries have become much more fun than we are. And because I don't have an office, so I sit in the tasting room and do my work, and I see a bunch of old people such as myself come in the door, but I don't see as many young people, and quite frankly, it's not that fun. Unless we invest in, we have 50 musical events a year, which is what we do to attract them. But I just wanted to get your comments about the funness, perhaps.
So the question is, how do we overcome the funness of breweries and make our products appealing to that age group?
I don't think it's fun. If you think about a brewery and think about like the design of the brewery usually and what's to offer, it's approachable, it's relaxing. You walk in the door and you feel like you're welcome, and you can sit and hang out with a bunch of friends and have a beer, and it's very casual and but you still respect, it's a brewery, they're making their beer, you respect the craft. Most wineries are premium experiences. Tasting rooms are designed to convey a sense of quality and professionalism. Most people make it a day to do it. It's not necessarily seen as a place you're going to go with a bunch of friends and just relax and hang out. And it's just a different tone and environment that we've curated in wine that beer has basically pivoted off of and created a completely different experience. So if you're driving in a car with a bunch of 20-plus-year-olds who just want to hang out and have a drink at lunch, they're going to gravitate towards an experience that to them is more approachable. And I think that's the difference between breweries and wineries, to be perfectly frank. And I think that it's not about fun, it's about creating an opportunity for this consumer to feel that wineries are as approachable as breweries. And that's done through how we talk to them, how we message them, how we explain the wines, not dumbing down our wine education, but certainly making it more digestible to them, and setting up experiences on site that are more group oriented, relaxing, while simultaneously being able to convey the attributes of our product so they'll hopefully take it home with them.
And add music. I mean, you know, I can't tell you how many times you've been to a tasting room and it's like, I can hear pin drops. So no one wants to say anything about how this unoaked Chardonnay tastes because they're afraid that they might say something wrong. Whereas if you just have some nice music and make it comfortable, or have a fire outside of your, you know, overlooking the vineyards, like let people just enjoy themselves and don't make it too.
I mean, you just said it, like afraid of what unoaked Chardonnay. We have fear. Like consumers are afraid to come taste wine because they don't want to say something wrong. Or I think it's, you know, tasting notes. I think we've kind of gone away from even listing tasting notes on our menu because if the consumers are tasting and they don't taste or smell what we're saying they should, they feel like they're doing something wrong, you know. And we don't have to eliminate the education, just do it in a way that keeps them feeling comfortable throughout the process.
Only because I don't want to be responsible for throwing the whole conference off schedule. I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll have to break. Any other questions? Yes.
To what extent do you think spending tolerance impacts the same issue? Millennial spending tolerance versus older generations who may have more disposable income?
Go for it.
So the question is, to what extent does spending tolerance impact the discussion?
So in a sense, I think it's a big deal, but in another sense, I think it's not. And what I mean by that is I think there's a trend in a younger generation to spend on different things. So they're not going to spend $50 on the liquid, but they're going to spend the same $50. It just has to be on an experience associated with that wine, would be my thought. You know, the idea that these spending patterns are completely different because of financial reasons, I think is fairly debunked. I think we just had a recession and it was timed at the wrong time for them, and it affected their behavior for a couple of years, and they spend differently, but I think they spend money.
Just from another practical point of view, I do about 40 events a year with MBA schools who are used to spending about $20 or $30 for wine tasting, like per student. And I usually charge upwards of $80 per person, but then I include $80 worth of wine that the student can take home. These are 25 to 28-year-old students. And so they're getting a tasting for free, but they're paying for the wine, or they're getting the wine for free and paying for a really neat experience. But these events usually sell out at about 40 people per tasting. Every business school has a wine club. You know, these are students that are just actually paying money to learn about wine, and they're paying to get access to people to teach them about wine. So I think you can offer value in different ways by actually charging more for it, but also offering something in return, like bottles that are pre-purchased, things like that.
Would you all join me in thanking our panelists for this presentation? Thank you.
I stayed here and the bed was not like better.
This is good. I got in late.